Good evening, everyone. Good evening and welcome. I'm Harold Holzer, as I hope you know, Director of Roosevelt House. And on behalf of Hunter President Jennifer Rabb, who's broken a few glass ceilings of her own in her time, it's a pleasure to welcome you to tonight's book discussion. Let me start with a question, even though the answer is pretty obvious. Has there ever been a better time or a better place or a more perfect subject than this book at Roosevelt House tonight? It's uncanny how brilliant we are at scheduling. The truth is, we have a superb book before us, and it was obvious that we wanted to have the author here in Eleanor Roosevelt's home. And we're delighted that she agreed to visit, especially during the run of our new exhibit, See How They Ran, which covers not only FDR and the denting the ceilings campaigns of people like Victoria Woodhull and Margaret Chase Smith and Shirley Chisholm, but also Eleanor and her work in politics. I'm sure you've all heard me tell my stories about the house more times than you need to hear, but for the benefit of our guests, just very briefly, a quick reminder that this is the pre-presidential home of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt. The house built for them as a wedding present by FDR's mother, Sarah Delano Roosevelt. To the outside world, it appeared as two separate 65th Street addresses, but inside, Sarah, of course, cut through the walls, separating their homes, ostensibly to create bigger rooms, but in so doing, as Eleanor remembered, she entered our side of the house at the most unexpected moments. It was quite an arrangement. We, who have the privilege of working here, like to call it the first New Deal. And just a reminder, we talk about this often too, the second New Deal, the real New Deal, was actually born here, just a few floors above where we're sitting. The Roosevelts lived and worked here exclusively from Election Day 1932 until they left for the inauguration in March. It was March then, 1933. Here, speaking of glass ceiling moments, Frances Perkins was summoned by FDR. She knew that he was going to ask her to be the first woman in a presidential cabinet. She was half reluctant to accept because she had personal issues with her husband. And when she entered the room, she said she was going to go for broke, as she wrote in her memoirs. FDR said, "Frances, I want you to be the first woman in the cabinet." And she said, "Only if you do old age pensions, like you did in Albany during the time I've been serving as commissioner." And FDR, who never said no to anybody, said, "Sure." And then she said, "Well, while we're at it, what about child labor laws, minimum wage?" So the social safety net was born in this house, thanks to Frances Perkins. It's an extraordinary thing. Eleanor may not have been in a position to break the glass ceiling herself, but we like to say that she built the skylight, and she did it here. And we're blessed to find new inspiration from her in this building. Today we're pleased to welcome two women who have been observing and breaking barriers of their own. To lead the conversation, we're delighted to welcome Susan Dominus, staff writer for the New York Times Magazine. Her bio is in your programs, but let me call out how prescient her recent notebook pieces have been. Donald Trump, King of the Old Boys Club and perhaps its destroyer. There's a good headline. And just a couple of days ago, was it a depressing week in politics for women or a great one? I want to hear the answer to that myself. Susan will be our interlocutor for a conversation with Ellen Fitzpatrick, whose new book is called The Highest Glass Ceiling. She is a professor of history at the University of New Hampshire. A swing state, please take note, even though she seems to vote in Massachusetts, which really is not terribly important in this upcoming election. She's written 8 books, including her New York Times bestseller, Letters to Jackie, which inspired a documentary film for which Ellen served as associate producer. Again, what a perfect place, perfect time to welcome Susan Dominus in conversation with Ellen Fitzpatrick.
I forget which side. Does it matter? It does matter.
You like your left? Okay. Pardon me,
Okay.
Ellen, I'm sorry.
I should have known it was the opposite of what my instinct was.
Well, I have to start by saying to everyone here, if you haven't read the book, it's a kind of history book that makes you feel very good because you feel you're reading history, but you're enjoying yourself so much. I really loved it and can't recommend it highly enough. Upstairs, we were just talking a little bit about the book, and one of the first things that you said was that, of course, the current state of affairs is very much on everyone's minds. And you said you can't really understand Hillary in the context of this election without understanding a little bit of the history of the women who came before her. So I know that's a big question, but maybe we could start with that.
Sure. One of the things that I learned in the course of working on this book, which I did not know before I began, is that there were some 200 women who have run for president of the United States. Most of them ran on, third-party tickets. They were minor candidates. They're unknown and probably should remain unknown to history. And there have been many, many male minor third-party candidates as well. But the whole story had a much longer backdrop than I would have ever imagined when I began the study. And what that began to make me understand was that if you're following the current campaign, there's been a lot of criticism of Hillary Clinton as someone who is not a very good politician. We've heard a lot about her deficiencies from her critics. And whether you like her or not, whether you plan to vote for her or not, if you know the history of what the women who aspired to the presidency before her faced, you come to understand what a remarkable achievement this is for her to be nominated by a major political party. And in a further irony, the very things that sunk all of her previous predecessors, which she managed to overcome, have become key sources of criticism of her during this campaign. So think of it as a giant jigsaw puzzle, and for a couple of centuries, people were working on that puzzle, and they couldn't make the pieces fit. Along comes someone who did, and at the end of we don't know the end of the process, so I won't get ahead of myself, but there has been no one who has put this together before. So whether you like Hillary Clinton, you don't like Hillary Clinton, one has to, I think if you know the history, acknowledge what an extraordinary thing this is that she has done. And I myself can no longer, having learned this history, tolerate these accounts that describe her as a poor politician, because politically, this has been just an incredibly difficult process for any woman of any political party and any set of political ideas to manage to do.
That's a great point. Given what you know about the women who ran before and got as far as the three that you profile in this book did, what do you think are the qualities, like if you were going to create your composite dream female presidential candidate, which clearly Hillary Clinton in some ways was not for many people, working off of the qualities that made these three women as successful as they were, what do you think that dream candidate would have going for her?
Would need to have going for her to be successful?
Yeah, so for example, why do you think Victoria Woodhull got as far as she did, in ways that might have helped Hillary's image if she had some of those qualities herself?
Oh, I see. Thinking about what some of the other ones had. Well, Victoria Woodhull was a very beautiful woman. She ran for president. She was the first woman to run for president in 1872. And, of course, women couldn't vote then. She said, this was a bit of an obstacle, obviously. Not going to be getting the women's vote. There was no women's vote. So her point was that I can't vote, but I can be voted for. And she was extremely radical politically, but she was very charismatic. And thousands of people, literally thousands of people, came out to hear her when she spoke. Partly because she was kind of over the top. She was, in some sense, more like Trump.
Right.
And you know, at the same time, she was also the first woman to open a brokerage firm on Wall Street, and she was very wealthy, which is an advantage. And because talk about ties to Wall Street, by the way, she was a Wall Street broker, but it was her money, however ill-gotten her gains, and so she was able to self-finance her campaign, and she put a lot of emphasis, ironically, again, there's a sort of Trump comparison, and also Carly Fiorina. I thought of this one. She was running, that if Carly Fiorina had been a communist, she would have been a little bit like Victoria Woodhull. I know that's a big leap to make, but she was really very charismatic. So some people find, this lacking in Secretary Clinton. I myself, have never really paused on that matter, but it's important to some people. So I would say that she had that. And Margaret Chase Smith, of these three women, she had a wonderful quality about her that really engaged her constituents in Maine. First woman to be elected to the House and to the Senate. She was sent back repeatedly. She was a moderate on social issues and quite liberal about some, a big supporter of New Deal programs. Here we are in the Roosevelt House, and also of the Great Society programs of Lyndon Johnson. And she was fiercely independent of her own political party for reasons having to do with their lack of support of her. She was a Republican. And to much of the chagrin of the men with whom she served in the Senate, one of them once said, if she votes with us, it's a coincidence. So she had no party loyalty. And some would like to see Hillary Clinton be less tied in to the, I think that sense of bracing independence is a positive. At least, I'm not sure that it gets you anywhere in American politics today. It doesn't get you the nomination of your party, but it was a wonderful quality that she had.
She had some parallels with Hillary Clinton in her personal life as well that I thought were very interesting.
Very problematic husband, yeah.
Actually,
was that what you were thinking of?
Yes, and the line that she gave to an interviewer, I guess when she was no longer serving, was, he loved the ladies and the ladies loved him back.
Yeah.
Then what did she say? After a while, she said something like, I endured it. I took it.
After a fashion.
I took it after a fashion. I thought that was it was so straightforward and human, But also you write in your book that her husband actually had a quote-unquote love child with another woman, and that might have derailed. Do you think that would have derailed her career if that had come, even after he had died? It would have still been on her that was...
Yes, because she, it's not clear that she knew before he died that he did have this child with another woman. He was a lot older than she was, and they had he met her when she was 16 years old. And she was a high school student working at the Maine telephone company, and, in the days of plugging and this and that. And he would call her and ask her what the weather was, and they struck up a conversation. And he was very interested in women. He was said to have died of, quote, the congressman's disease, a heart disease from having worked so hard on legislation. Someone had suggested he died of the congressman's other disease, which was tertiary syphilis, which is what he really died of. So he made Bill Clinton look like a choir boy, and he did have this child, and when he died, there's a document in Margaret Chase Smith's papers showing that she was confronted with the fact that he had been making payments to this to support this young woman, and the mother of this child then expected her to continue, which she did until the young woman came of age. But none of that, none of what I just told you ever came to light during Margaret Chase Smith's lifetime or that of her husband. And I think it would be fair to ask, are we any the worse for not having known it?
Yeah, I think we're.
You know, I mean, she had a very illustrious career. She, you know, she did a lot of good, and had she been, you know, sort of enveloped in scandal and been unable to carry on any kind of political career, that would have been a loss. I think her constituents would have felt anyway.
You know, obviously, one of the things that's characterized this campaign for many people is a real virulent strain of misogyny. And you were saying that none of these women escaped a kind of humiliation. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about that, because and the range of what those humiliations were. I mean, I almost think that actually none of them fared, well, with the exception of one incident with Shirley Chisholm, I think almost none of them fared as poorly as Hillary has, perhaps because they didn't get as far.
In terms of the humiliation index?
Yeah, the abuse index, yeah.
I think
she's had it the worst.
I think we've reached some new thresholds in the last couple of weeks. Yeah, I think that that has been really quite remarkable what's happened most recently. But in their own time, I would say that Victoria Woodhull, who was living in Victorian America, really, you know, her problem became national news. She wasn't really a contender. She inspired a whole conversation, a national conversation, about the prospect of having a woman president, which is part of what makes her fascinating. And she was in jail on Election Day, as some would like, apparently, to see Hillary Clinton be. And that really came about from a scandal in her family. Her mother was mentally ill. She was convinced that Victoria Woodhull's husband was trying to harm her. She went to a local police precinct in New York City and reported the husband as, you know, a ne'er-do-well who was trying to hurt her. And in the course of investigating her complaints, so Victoria Woodhull's mother complaining about her son-in-law, it came to light that Victoria Woodhull was living with her former husband and her current husband. Now, her former husband, Dr. Woodhull, was a morphine addict who was a ne'er-do-well, and she divorced him. But they had 2 children together. And late in life, when he was dying, she and her husband took him in for the remainder of his days. But in this moment, in the 1870s, the idea of a woman living with 2 men became a major scandal. And it hit the newspapers. It was covered lavishly. And Victoria Woodhull, very radical, very outspoken, did not take it sitting down. She accused the leading Protestant minister of her day of having an affair with one of his constituents, which was true. That was happening. Henry Ward Beecher, as it turns out, of the illustrious Beecher family, and it set off a huge scandal. She wrote about this in her newspaper, and what she was calling out was the sexual double standard of her era, and that women were being held to a standard of morality that men were not being held to. And it sunk her presidential bid. It was widely written about and led to an infamous trial, the Beecher-Tilton scandal, that preoccupied the New York and national press for many, many years. So she did, like Donald Trump, she took the nuclear option when she was accused of wrongdoing. And it did, of course, nothing to advance her political career. In Shirley's case, she was the victim of a dirty trick by the Nixon administration, which really didn't come to light until the Watergate scandal, long after her campaign was over. but that was a very great humiliation for her. When she learned what had happened, there was a fake press release that was put out by, it turned out, people in President Nixon's administration. They stole some Hubert Humphrey campaign stationery. They created a fake press release that was reporting that Shirley Chisholm had a mental health history, that she had been in and out of insane asylums, that she had been picked up on the street, dressed as a man. There were details, horrible
Frothing at the
details.
mouth, that she was
Yeah,
foaming
that
at
she
the-
was foaming at the mouth, that she was, a very sick person, and warning that particularly that African Americans should not be deluded and vote for this woman. Now, Shirley Chisholm was no threat to Richard Nixon, even had she been nominated by the Democratic Party. But, and that in some sense is the perversity of it, that anyone would go to those kinds of lengths to embarrass her. And the press actually didn't give it much play, but she knew about it. It was in the last days of the California primary, and she actually wept. She was a pretty tough woman. She wept when this was revealed to her. So,
And what do you think was it just pure racism and sexism that was motivating the venom of that particular, given that she wasn't a particularly powerful political figure at the time?
well, I think it had to do in part with the perversities of the Nixon administration and with the fact that Chisholm was a very vocal and visible critic of Nixon and particularly of the Vietnam War. She was, extremely radical from the get-go when she went to the Congress, and she refused to vote for any appropriations bill that had any money that was going to the war in Southeast Asia, and they really disliked her. And they disliked her politics. So I don't think it was simply race and gender, it was her politics as well, and that, she sort of wound up on a kind of enemies list, I would say, of which, there were many other members, and a lot of bad stuff happened in that context.
And for you, the humiliation suffered by Margaret Chase Smith were, obviously there was nothing as extreme as that kind of disgusting
Right.
press release, but for a woman of her standing, the way that she was treated, you thought, was in fact humiliating. Could you talk a little bit about what she would have
Sure.
experienced as humiliating?
Well, she was, and all of these women were very tough in the face of all of this. It's a dirty business. Let's face it. Getting elected to the American presidency, it's not easy under any circumstances. And many of the men who have run for this office have been subject to humiliation and so forth as well. But the sexual component of this, in the case of the women, has, and some aspects of it I think are somewhat unique to them. In the case of Margaret Chase Smith, she was a very greatly admired senator in the United States in 1964. She had a very long and illustrious career, and overnight, literally overnight, once she announced that she was running for president, she was treated by the press and political pundits as having lost leave of her senses, that she could imagine that a woman could be president. The Wall Street Journal ridiculed her announcement in which she listed all of the reasons why she shouldn't run for president, given all the obstacles ahead of her. And then she said, and having looked at all those, I've decided in the end I'm going to do it anyway. And the Wall Street Journal the next day wrote a story saying, published a story saying that she appeared to be making a bid for the nation's illogical vote. That is, women that, can't put two sentences together. So there was a lot made of her age. She was 67, that she was menopausal, and that she was too old to be president, that she lacked the stamina to be president. And
Isn't that incredible?
the physical descriptions of Margaret Chase Smith and the shift in those overnight were amazing, because before she ran for president. She was depicted as, slim, athletic, youthful looking. Yes, she had gray hair, but she was really a very attractive woman. She, took great care of herself. And then overnight, she became the silver-haired, sort of hag that was aspiring for this job. And she brought it up on Meet the Press, I think, at one of the Sunday news programs, when she was asked about her age, and she said, "How come you're not discussing the age of any of the male candidates?" And she said, I'm curious, suddenly my age seems to be a big issue. And the next day there was a story in the Los Angeles Times reporting on her pushback on the age issue, and the headline said, Margaret Chase Smith, 67, hits age talk. So, proving her very point. So it was really kind of amazing. But I think mostly for her, it was stunning to see the lack of regard, the lack of respect. She had been on the Armed Services Committee. She had a lot of experience. She had known every president from Roosevelt. She knew Roosevelt well. She knew Truman, Eisenhower, and she and Kennedy sparred and eventually sort of made peace with each other. One of Kennedy's advisors, Dick Donahue, was so frustrated by her independence. He said that, that when Kennedy was president, we couldn't get Margaret Chase Smith to vote for adjournment. They were trying to get a vote for her for the nuclear test ban treaty. So she was greatly admired by all these men that she worked with. But overnight, she became the subject of ridicule. And that, to me, is a humiliation for quite a distinguished political figure.
Were you shocked when Donald Trump started talking about Hillary Clinton's stamina? Because obviously you wrote the book long before that word came up in his campaign. You were not shocked?
No, it was like, here we go again. None of this has really shocked me. Well, I was shocked last week in the debate, but I have not. Most of what you see, has not surprised me of what has happened, having looked at this history.
What were some of the biggest here we go again moments for you in this campaign?
Well, one, I thought that more would be made of her age, but once Trump emerged as the candidate, that was sort of neutralized, because we're not going to be dwelling on age, since he is actually a little bit older than Hillary Clinton. So, but the stamina, she lacks the stamina. She's not, strong enough. There's a wonderful cartoon that I saw a couple of weeks ago that shows when the whole issue came up about the spell that she had when she was in New York and her medical records, and there's a picture of an elephant in a doctor's coat holding a medical chart, and it says on it, Clinton, Hillary. It's her medical chart, and there's a little box to check male or female, and female is checked. And the elephant is the title of the thing is, finally, the smoking gun is revealed in Hillary Clinton's medical record, i.e. that she's female. And at the bottom of it, there's a little elephant who makes a little comment on the side who says, we don't see how she's ever going to recover. Right. She's not going to recover from this malady. She is going to be a woman throughout this campaign. So I suppose, the fact that narrative has, remained, that somehow there is something about her health that's dubious. Is she really up to it? That's part of the stamina thing. There was another thing that just flitted in and out of my mind. When Ben Carson referred to her as Lucifer, Thomas Nast did a cartoon of Victoria Woodhull in 1872, the caption of which, it shows her dressed with horns and a black cape, and the caption is Mrs. Satan. So it was really, Back to the Future.
And so why do you think, but even all of those experiences, with the exception of the press release, were patronizing, they were insulting, they were demeaning, but they weren't as hateful as obviously what Hillary Clinton has had to experience. And what do you think is different about her in this moment in time that has made it so
I'm
vicious?
not sure that I would say they weren't as hateful, because I think if you or I were them, we would have found them quite hateful, you know? And they were widely reported in the way that this has been.
But compare it to like the kinds of T-shirts you see at Trump rallies, I mean, that kind of thing.
Well, presidential politics were very different then, and it wasn't the business that it is today, and so that's different. And the role of the media, and particularly in our own time in this election, social media, the new technology has changed that a lot. So this is a humiliation to the nth power, right? Because there's just so much more of it. And a lot of it under the cloak of anonymity through the web and through Twitter and comments and trolling and all of that. This is a whole new dimension in which one can be degraded that our society has now apparently advanced to. So that's very, very different. And I think there was some level of regard for the office itself that has diminished in our time, although the elections of the 19th century were not exactly, people weren't always on their best behavior either. So what's different this time is that Hillary Clinton may be elected president. She is actually a contender, as they say.
And that leads me to my next question, which is you talked about her having all the puzzle pieces kind of come together. Obviously, one of the things that's made it possible for her to be a serious contender is just it's 2016, as Justin Trudeau would say. You know, we're living in an era when women have have just advanced to new levels of power. But beyond that, what is it about? What are the puzzle pieces for her in particular that came
and I
together?
would say on the first point, there's nothing that's inevitable about this at all. And as I've been talking about this subject, now I'm quoting myself. This is time to get off the lecture circuit when you're quoting yourself. But the idea that a lot of people have where they're waiting for, quote, a better woman candidate, they're going to be waiting a long, long time, in my estimation, based on what I know about this history. Now, a candidate that's more congenial to your own politics or who lacks some of the baggage that Clinton has had, yes. But part of what people see as the baggage is what got her over those hurdles. And let me enumerate what I think those things are. First, the money. The inability to raise money has been a major issue for every woman that has run for president, and most of them couldn't do it. A woman like Elizabeth Dole, who really was quite well regarded in the Republican Party, had a very robust resume, a lot of admiration for Elizabeth Dole, couldn't put the money together. Pat Schroeder went down over the money issue as well. So she has been able to put the financing together, but in this election, this has become a big source of criticism because it's seen as corrupt. She's corrupt now. She's got the money, but she's corrupt. And she raised it in the way that a lot of male presidential candidates have raised it over the past several elections through super PACs and all the problematic campaign financing that exists. Apparently, she should have done it in some, holier way. She didn't, and that has, created a firestorm of criticism of her. Secondly, she had the national recognition. That's where a lot of women presidential aspirants fell down. They just didn't have the profile or the platform. And she got there because she was married to a president. She was in the White House for his 2 terms. For all the problems the Clintons had, she's been a public figure, and this is also a source of criticism, for almost 30 years. She's been on the scene in American politics. She left. She was elected to the Senate on her own. She ran for president. Her 18 million votes in 2008 were more than any presidential candidate running in a primary ever got in American history, male or female. No, including Barack Obama, no one running in a presidential primary season ever got 18 million votes until Hillary Clinton did. So she proved that she could get votes. And that was persuasive to the Democratic Party. So the elite of the party, the power that the Clintons had through their access, her access through her husband, and also her own accomplishments, gave her a kind of standing within the inner circles of the Democratic Party that no previous woman had within their political party. Margaret Chase Smith, I've described to you, very independent, didn't help her. She didn't owe anything to the major figures in the Republican Party, and they knew she couldn't be elected. So the money, the national profile, the demonstrated vote-getting ability, and the support of the elite within the party, and finally, the experience. No presidential candidate in American history has ever put these pieces together. Obviously, because no first lady has ever run for president before. We have that dimension of it. For better or worse. Some people think this is bad. We don't want to return to the Clintons. It's like a TV program. We don't want to rerun, change the channel, something new. But that, she then was elected to the Senate, 2 terms on her own, ran for president, got all those votes, and then in defeat joined her rival's administration and became the Secretary of State. 6 previous presidents, including Jefferson and Madison, rose to the presidency from the Secretary of State. Unfortunately, it's a declension model. The later ones weren't so good in the late 19th century, but it's a remarkable resume. So for all those reasons, I would say she put the pieces together.
She literally put some of the pieces together. I'm very interested in writing at some point about the fact that she was instrumental, Bill Clinton has said and Madeleine Albright has said, in basically making sure that Madeleine Albright became Secretary of State when she did. She was instrumental in making that a female role, therefore paving the way for her own role as a female Secretary of State, which made it possible for her to be president.
Yes.
So one of the things I loved about the book, in the chapter about Victoria Woodhull, is the sort of link between the culture of clairvoyances and seances post-Civil War and Victoria Woodhull's role in all that, and that direct line to women as public figures and to electable officials. And here we are at Hillary Clinton. So now I'm going to ask you to be clairvoyant.
Okay.
Given that Hillary Clinton is unique, where do we imagine the next serious female presidential candidate coming from? Will it come from, do you think, a very heavily female cabinet, as Hillary Clinton has promised she'll have? Do you think it will be more like a Trump-like figure, somebody who's like a self-made, not that Trump was self-made, but to me, based on the Victoria Woodhull model, I could imagine a self-made millionaire woman that on the young side, that could be a very appealing model that would be, divorced from all of the realities of Hillary's background. I don't know, do you have any thoughts about that? Have you given that any thought?
It's an interesting question. We were, it's too great a temptation not to use this line. We were having a discussion in my department recently about how we can get students interested in studying history, and one of my colleagues said that we should advertise ourselves this way about ourselves as historians and our skills. We predict the past.
Oh, that's great. I love that. That's so
I
great.
can tell you what happened, but I can't tell you much about what will happen. So I can say that I think it highly unlikely that somebody from outside electoral politics will emerge. If Hillary Clinton is elected president in a month or so, that, I believe, very much as was the case, is an interesting thing. It will be a breach in the wall of resistance to this idea, just as the election of Barack Obama was in 2008. On the other hand, when the wall is breached, it seems that the waters rush in and it roils the ocean. And we have seen emerge a kind of explicit willingness to engage in really outright racist language and talk and, talk about demeaning discussion of our president, duly elected president, that is shocking for those of us who are of a certain age and lived through the civil rights movement and the age of segregation and desegregation. And so if the wall is breached, I suspect that the gender issue is not going to be readily resolved. And there may be, in fact, more backlash for a little while. There may be some of that. However, I think what it does is to open the way for us to be surprised, as we were in some sense by Barack Obama, a young, relatively inexperienced political figure, to have advanced in the way that he did. It opens the possibility that it doubles our chances of there being interesting and good people out there who have something to contribute to our nation, and we all profit from that. If the political parties were to roll over and die in their beds tonight, we might see someone emerge from business, but I don't suspect we will see that. It just is, I think, really creates a sense of there's no pathway here. It's not a story about pathways. It's a story about historical change, and these figures like Obama and Clinton emerge from the change. And it creates the it grows. It grows. So you have a revolution in your society, and a quiet revolution over many generations. Clinton stands on the shoulders of the feminists, the civil rights activists, the radicals who opened up the Democratic Party, who changed its rules, and it creates greater opportunity, which is what should happen in a democracy. So we can't predict where these people are going to come from.
Right.
And we've had some remarkable people who have become president of the United States. They walk into their historical moment. And the question is, who will that be? And that's one of the most wonderful things, I think, about the story. You don't know where they're going to come from. You sort of know them when you see them, even if there's resistance to them. Somebody like Martin Luther King, for instance, who was a young and experienced clergyman when his historical moment came to him. And he was asked to use his church as a place where civil rights activists could gather and begin to mount a challenge to segregation. And so, these are remarkable people who walk into history. And the ripples from what they have contributed last far beyond their own time, I think. Anyway, I'm quite optimistic about all of that. Gee, I'm surprising myself. I felt very pessimistic all day. now I feel quite
I
optimistic.
can't imagine why.
It's been challenging.
Yeah. Well, should we move on to questions from the audience? I'm sure many people have them. Okay, we'll start here, I guess. Thanks.
I think like a lot of people, I'm puzzled by millennial women
Mm-hmm.
who don't like or don't see the point. Is it just that you say they think, oh, we'll have a better woman later, or they don't understand the connection to reproductive rights? What's going on?
Well, I think that I would say a couple of things about that. I think one is that it may not be as much a negative about her as it was the appeal of Bernie Sanders' campaign. And so I've thought about this. When I was a young college student in my 20s in New England, I have my college classmates here tonight, here in the front row, and back here, Jan as well. We might have been on the Bernie bandwagon rather than the Hillary bandwagon. I think that Bernie Sanders was speaking to concerns that young college students in particular have today, and not only college students, but younger people. So they're mired in debt from school. He was offering a lot of attention to some of the issues that concern them. So part of it, I think, was that. And then, the other side of it, I think that there is a sense of Hillary really is a different generation coming out of second wave feminism. And though there is a sense, I think, that, that's okay, we're over that now, and that she belongs to the past. It's really kind of mind-bending that the first woman to come anywhere near the presidency is cast as, quote, of the past. Really? What past?
Republicans are so bad on women, don't they see a difference now?
I think in terms of I don't think it's restricted to one party. We'll have to see how they vote in the end. I suspect some of them will come
There's
around.
somebody standing up in back, Bill.
I'm wondering what your thoughts are. I know you can't predict you can only predict the past, but depending
I'll repeat the question for you.
depending on who wins, looking
Yeah.
at both Hillary Clinton winning, fingers toes crossed, and Trump winning, how do you think that will impact either one on the mayoral campaign election in New York City?
I have
Because right now it's
no
all
idea.
men. Right now, the only men.
I
only men
wish
have
I
declared.
could tell you I know nothing about New York politics. I'm sorry to say that, and I'm in the belly of the beast here. The hardest single thing I had to do in writing this book was understanding Brooklyn politics. I had to educate myself about these Democratic clubs, which is a whole. It was amazing to me. Now, these were my people. These were run by these Irish political bosses in the old days. And the amazing story about Shirley Chisholm is the way that they rose up, African Americans rose up and overthrew those old Irish bosses. I was cheering. My ancestors would have been unhappy with me on that point, but I was just cheering. So I'm really sorry that I can't speak to that. Susan, you might know. What do you think?
I don't have to be strong. What do you think? Did you have an opinion? It sounds like you maybe did. Well, I guess maybe the broader question you're asking is, if there's a female president, will that then cascade down into making it easier for other
That
women
will make a
generally?
difference. I do think so, yes. Yeah.
This is about Shirley Chisholm.
Mhm.
Now, the Black Caucus, the men, did not support her at all. Could you talk a little bit
Sure.
about that, having just said
Yeah.
that how she bowled over a whole lot of other folks?
Well, the interesting thing about Shirley was that she, when she decided to run for president, one would have thought that she might have been supported by other African American political figures and activists with whom, she was involved in the Congressional Black Caucus and in New York politics. And also, this is the moment when there is second wave feminism. There are a lot, Gloria Steinem, Betty Friedan, Bella Abzug. Did everybody get on the bandwagon of Shirley? No. There were many African American male politicians who told her they couldn't support her. They actively discouraged her. They undermined her and her opinion, and she was furious about it. They wouldn't endorse her, and the same was true of some of the leading feminist leaders in the period as well. Bella Abzug infuriated Shirley Chisholm because she insisted on being on the dais when Shirley Chisholm announced that she was running for president, but she refused to endorse her. And it was also the case that Gloria Steinem, who was appearing on television with Shirley, they were on a Chicago talk show in the midst of the '72 election, and the newscaster said to Gloria, "So, you're going to vote for Shirley?" And she said, "Well, she sort of wobbled on the question. She said, I think that Shirley is the best woman candidate running, and, but that George McGovern is the best male candidate running. So they get off the soundstage, and Shirley, takes Gloria aside and says, listen, Gloria, you're either with me or you're against me, but make up your mind. It's not both. And I think that Gloria Steinem did then. She was a Chisholm delegate, as was Betty Friedan, to the Democratic Convention. So she did come around on that point. But Shirley was prickly on this as well. She really expected a robust response from other feminists and African Americans.
So you could tell the story about Betty Friedan and her.
I don't think I can go there.
Okay.
Well,
Okay.
Betty Friedan was, it caused a lot of trouble. She was, Shirley's campaign was being covered by the Amsterdam News, which it was fascinating to read the stories of the coverage of the campaign. And the Amsterdam News ran a story, which I went every which way to try to track down to see if this is true, that just before just before the New York primary, Betty Friedan had the idea of going up to Harlem with a wagon full of watermelons that they were going to hand out, free watermelon. It was like June, it was hot and so forth. And so the Amsterdam News columnist who wrote this said, we're not going to have Betty coming up. The sisters, quote, went crazy and said, we're not going to have Betty Friedan up here handing out watermelon to the folks in Harlem. That's not going to happen. And she's not doing Shirley any favors here. So was this a true story? Was it apocryphal? What was it? There's mixed opinions on this, and I've attempted to track it down. So
Maybe Deborah back there.
First, I just want to also add my praise to Ellen's book. It was so helpful in doing the exhibition upstairs when I realized how important it was to cover women who ran for the president way before the current situation. Just first a quick comment and then a question. I came to really admire Margaret Chase Smith through your book and further research, especially for her Declaration of Conscience speech in 1950, where she criticized and denounced the methods of Senator McCarthy way before so many male politicians. And it was really an extraordinary moment for a woman, no less any senator, who was only 2 years into their first term in the Senate. So that's another way we should remember Margaret Chase Smith was for her political courage. But I want to bring this now back to prior candidates, Alan, and ask you about the influence, if there was one, of seeing Geraldine Ferraro and then Sarah Palin nominated as the vice presidential candidates. Did that contribute over time to the possibility of Hillary Clinton getting the nomination?
it's a different kettle of fish, I think. It's a poor metaphor, but it's different. I think the vice presidential nominations in both cases were cast as pandering, quote, to the women's vote, pandering. But what they were a recognition of is something that I think does matter, which is that when women have been able to vote in the United States for less than 100 years. If Hillary Clinton is elected president, her first term in 2016, her first term will end with the centennial of the ratification of the 19th Amendment. There are women walking around today who were born when women could not vote. My mother is going to be 95 in February, and she was born 2 years after women were enfranchised. She's following all of this with very great interest, as you can imagine. So the suffragists hoped that women would vote differently than men. They would help to clean up politics. They would, invigorate and improve our democratic institutions. And it turned out that they didn't vote differently from men until the 1980s, when President Reagan ran suddenly a gender gap began to emerge, and it has remained a factor in American politics and a growing factor. It's huge today in this election. There is a huge gender gap. And that gap has made women a force in political life that then leads to things like the Ferraro and Palin efforts to appeal to and attract women voters without giving them the top job, as it's said. You know, it's different as a kind of patronage or vote-getting effort on the part of the political parties or the candidates than it is. Obviously, though, these two figures could have become president had their the standard bearer been elected and something happened to them. So after the assassination of President Kennedy, there was a pivot in the views towards Margaret Chase Smith. There was a little boomlet of interest in her as a possible presidential or vice presidential candidate that disappeared after Kennedy was killed, when suddenly Americans thought, wow, the vice president could actually become president. And that was damaging to her. So in some sense, I think that this is a sort of word salad I have going here, but I'm trying to convey the fact that I think that the vice presidential thing is somewhat different. It didn't pave the way, I don't think, for Clinton. This is a very different struggle, but it's a recognition of the importance of women as a variable in electoral politics. And women, if Hillary Clinton is elected in November, women will have played a major part in that happening. I will predict.
In the back over.
In identifying the 5 puzzle pieces that you say contributed to Hillary's nomination, are you suggesting that Hillary was conscious of this and purposely put all of these puzzle pieces together, or did some of it happen serendipitously?
I don't think, I don't think that it was, I don't want to launch a new conspiracy theory tonight. No, I don't think so. And I don't think that Hillary Clinton, like, you know, a little boy is born and he thinks someday maybe I'll be president of the United States. I doubt if Hillary Clinton thought that. She was president of her class at Wellesley, and, you know, she's clearly a very ambitious woman, as every single candidate that runs for president is ambitious. These are not your average bears. They're not your average bears, to quote my friend Lindy Hess. These are extraordinary people with extraordinary ambitions. I don't know about you. I never had a day in my life where I woke up and thought I'd be an effective president of the United States, and let alone put myself through all of this. So, no, I don't think that it was conscious on her part. And not only has she been the only person to put these pieces together, after she's elected, if she is, no other woman will have to put these pieces together. No one else will have to do it. It will be enough to have been a good senator with a national reputation, a good governor, the kinds of things that get men elected eventually to the presidency. So this overkill of all of this, I don't think any, and that will be a legacy if she is elected, of what she did this time around. It really is amazing, by the way. You know, I really hope that people will take that away, whether you like her or not, to think about, she has been greatly underestimated in my view, and that's why the history is powerful, that it sets in context what this has involved to get anybody to this point. So I do think that I don't think it was conscious, but, you know, she obviously worked very, very hard at it, and she's been criticized for it. there was this amazing piece that Maureen Dowd, not a fan of Mrs. Clinton, I don't need to tell anyone in New York City, had said that she thought that her vote for the in favor of the Iraq War resolution was a reflection of her presidential ambitions, because she had this incredible line where she said she knows that no woman can be elected president who has love beads in her jewelry case. And in a sense, it refers back to the association of women in the early 20th century. I don't think Maureen Dowd had this in mind, but it was true, with the issue of pacifism. Most of the leading women public figures were pacifists in the early 20th century, and that even when they weren't pacifists anymore, there were doubts about their ability to handle this role of commander-in-chief. That's been a major obstacle as well. I should have mentioned that she was able to neutralize.
All right, maybe one more. Yes.
Thank you. Susan Wittenberg, Ellen's classmate. I think it's very interesting when you said that the next woman coming along won't need to have Hillary's stellar qualifications. So that, in fact, without even being elected yet, that's an incredible legacy, because what we've been worrying about was, well, who could possibly come along to match her,
Right.
her record? And so if now what you feel is that a senator, a governor, someone with a more reasonable equivalent past could actually become the president, then the world has changed.
Right.
And
Oh,
that's
I
her
do.
contribution.
I think that's right, and I think that it really is remarkable. You know, there were people who were in the Roosevelt House. There were people who wanted Eleanor Roosevelt to run for president, and she said, "I just don't think that that anyone is ready to take orders from a woman." And apparently there are others who think this today as well. This is an idea that doesn't die so easily. So, you know, that I do think that that will be very, very important. And that it will still be a remarkable person. All these people are remarkable in their ways. There are very few of them who have become our leaders, but it won't be necessary to persuade until relatively, now over 90% of Americans say that they'd be happy to vote for a woman for president, but 50% say they await a better woman candidate. Those who are, their heart is beating fast for Elizabeth Warren. Elizabeth Warren hasn't begun to be tested in the arena that Hillary Clinton has been in for decades. So I think that it's foolhardy to think that they would not face these kinds of difficulties.
So first, let's thank Susan and Ellen for an extraordinary conversation. And for the class of 1990 for coming to join us. Now we invite everyone upstairs to continue the conversation at a reception where you must buy and get inscriptions by Ellen's book. Thank you all for coming. We'll see you upstairs to celebrate.